Round 2 is the extracurriculars. Here's what I want you to look for. I want you to look for special talents, for leadership potential. I want you to be thinking about who has long-term interests versus who is newly discovering their passions. What are the levels of involvement? You know, again, well-rounded versus specific, and rooted versus exploring. And it's not that one of those is better or worse. You can decide for yourselves what you value here. And so if something stands out to you, you know, trust your instincts. And here are our 6 candidates again. Connor is the founder of the Science Club. He does philosophy, debate, and he's on the varsity cross-country team. Jillian is involved in her church youth group. She does viola and community service. Hannah is the founding editor of a political magazine. She does age outreach and is the vice president of her student government. It's SGA, Student Government Association. These, by the way, were pulled from the boxes we fill out on the extracurriculars. These are the actual initialisms that we use for what your children do. Ethan is the senior class council activities chair. He's in Boys State. I'll just explain what that is. It's a conference that schools nominate typically one boy to go to and they go to Boys State, and one girl to go to and they go to Girls State, and they do a mock government simulation. It's usually a pretty big honor at a school to be nominated to go. And Ethan also does piano and drums. Julie is the treasurer of the drama club in 11. Her other activities are scattered. Again, this is what the admissions officer wrote about the extracurriculars. And then Sharon had 1 summer job in sales, does dance lessons, and did a year of autism volunteering. The extracurricular lists your children fill out on the Common App and the 4-page resumes that they then send to us, this is what they get stripped down to. Does that freak you out? I think it should tell you something about where your children should be putting their energies, and it's not fretting over the 3-page resume that they want to send us. And, you know, you may feel inclined to disagree with me here, but I think this is actually sufficient to get a sense of what they're doing. Unless someone says otherwise, you can assume these activities are sustained over a period of at least a couple years, and that the level of involvement is deep enough that it's worth noting, but not so significant that someone wrote something else about it. I frequently will write things like, you know, piano and drums, that's a lot of time spent on the drums. Which is not what was written for Ethan, so you can assume the drums are significant, but not so significant. Versus Hannah, who gets noted as being the founding editor of the political magazine. I think this is enough, really, for you to go on and to get a sense of how they want to spend their time, and for you to read between the lines on who you think they are. But, you know, I mean, this is the reality of what happens. They submit to us all this paperwork, and it gets pulled down into these little bites. So I'm going to give you another couple minutes, or maybe less than that, and I'm going to ask you to vote for 2. Again, combining the academics and the extracurriculars. And I'll flip back to the academic page in just a moment. Kind of fun, right? Yeah. Is this easy?
No.
I know, we haven't even gotten to the hard part yet.
What's SGA?
Student Government. Student Government Association. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the academics really briefly. So these are the academics, just to refresh your memory on what they are. Review your choices. Who do you like? Remember, you can only vote for 2. You can change your vote, of course. Here they are. Are you ready? Is that a yes? Is that a no?
Did you explain why the entrance, the mathematics, weight, and the physics is not mentioned?
Sorry, say that again?
If you go back to the academic weight, the SN, the math is 670, and then physics, he says physics is 330, right?
Yeah.
730.
730. So it seems to me it doesn't matching each other.
That happens.
Did he explain that?
No. I can't. I mean, maybe he had a bad day. Maybe he gets freaked out about testing. Maybe he got a couple of questions wrong that he normally would have gotten right. Maybe he got lucky with the physics.
Can I ask the question then? Would you assume because he got a higher one that that's probably the case, right? In other words, you can't do
You can do poorly on both, or, but if you do well on one, you're probably in the ballpark for the other.
Yeah, sometimes we also take our cues from what teachers say, right? So if you get to Ethan's recommendations and he's got a math teacher hypothetically writing a rec about how great he is at math, that's different than getting a rec where the teacher's a little bit more reserved, right? So, sometimes you get clarification when you get to the other pieces, and sometimes you don't, and you just have to make a decision, how much does that score bother me?
Wouldn't it also be like if he's taking IB HL Physics Year 2, and he's taking IB HL Math Year 2, I'd kind of figure, okay, that SAT score, I wouldn't take as so significant.
Yeah, I think that's right. And sometimes it's also like where you're from and what school you're in. Some schools notoriously test bad on specific things and notoriously test well on others, and so you kind of modulate your expectations for that. But no, you don't know. And you might get answers as we move into the next slides, but at the moment, that's what you got. So, who in round 2 is voting for Connor? 1, 2, 3, oh, Connor. Hands high and proud, so we can count you. Wow, that was a big shift. Well, why? Somebody who jumped on the Connor bandwagon. Why did you decide to give him the shot
I think
now?
he really adds to the community. I mean, his GPA was much lower. I think the lowest of all of them. But what he's done here shows he's going to really add something to that campus community.
So he's not necessarily working as hard as he could in the classroom, but he's clearly doing other things with his time.
But
well, he might be working as hard as he can in the classroom. But
Yeah, that's true too.
his SAT math was 760, which is good.
Yeah.
So he's a founder of the science club, and he's good at math, and he's in the varsity cross country. Good package.
Does anyone want to make the argument why people were foolish to vote for Connor this time around? It's cool, you can do it. I mean, I don't mind. I mean, I think it'd be totally reasonable to say, like, look at his SAT scores and look at the stuff he's doing. He's clearly capable. Why isn't he doing better in class?
He's spending too much time on others.
And I think depending on your point of view, that can be appealing or it can be not appealing. Who's voting for Jillian? What happened? Why no love for Jillian?
It doesn't specify what kind of community service she's doing.
But look at that, like community service, church youth group. She's a good kid.
she's a good kid.
What's wrong with Jillian?
She might be too conservative for your school.
I mean, I'll go back to the point about diversity. I mean, it's a joke, but there actually is a serious point there. And I'll go back to the point about diversity, right? Like, a community full of godless liberals is no fun. Like, we've had an interesting controversy on campus this year about the Tufts Christian Fellowship and their definition of what you need to be in terms of faith to be as a leader in their organization. And I think, regardless of if you agree with the decision or not, the conversation is one that has value. And so, maybe being in a church youth group at a school that is, notoriously Jewish and Asian is a benefit. But, that's okay. None of you voted for her. Who's voting for Hannah? Oh, my goodness. That's a lot more. Many more. That looks like about half. Why? Why are you voting for her this time around?
She's sort of focused in a specific area and a leader in that area.
So you like the focus?
Yeah.
I'm just curious, what sounds more impressive to you? Community service or AIDS outreach?
AIDS outreach.
AIDS outreach. That sounds more impressive. It's more interesting, certainly.
Seems more
Specific. Now, what I find really interesting about this is Jillian could be in the exact same AIDS outreach club as Hannah. They could be in the same organization. And Jillian might have listed it on her extracurricular resume as community service. And Hannah might have written AIDS outreach. And as a result, we have different reactions.
That's difficult.
Yeah, and it's possible that the admissions officer just wrote community service instead of writing AIDS outreach or whatever it was, but that's actually very unlikely. More likely is that Jillian lumped a bunch of community service things she was doing together into community service and listed it under one thing and didn't explain what that meant. And so the specificity helps. Because it's not that you're doing community service that is important. It's what I can see about who you are because of what you're doing. And for Hannah, it's not that she's doing AIDS outreach that's relevant, it's that it fits in to a sense of who she is. Blanket statements like community service don't do that. So who's voting for Ethan? Who likes Ethan this time? Similar contingent of many people. Who's voting for Julie? Julie, similarly, one person. Why?
I think to take on a treasurer's job. And that you did it.
Actually,
She said to do that.
actually, I totally get that. There's a woman, when we're about to get to Sharon, and so this usually comes up when I get to Sharon, but there's a woman in my office who worked during her high school years, and she's a strong advocate for the kids that have jobs in their applications, because it's really unusual now that students that are applying to places like Tufts work, unless they have to for financial reasons, which, you know, is interesting in and of itself. And so when a student who doesn't have to get a job gets a job, she advocates for those kids really hard because she feels like there's a significance there that she understands that perhaps the rest of us are missing. And
along with her grades, I thought it was good, you know.
yeah, and so I like actually that you're, like, people are laughing because you like the kid who's a treasurer, but I do think that there's significance when you can say, like, I understand that commitment.
Yeah.
And, you know, the job for the rest of us, when that comes up, is to know that Karen has a bias in favor of those kids. And to listen to her when she makes that case and respond accordingly in respect. But at the same time, sometimes she makes the case just because she likes those kids, and sometimes she makes the case because it's valid. I'm not saying one way or the other here, but... and so, you know, we know who everyone likes and who they don't like and why. And then who's voting for Sharon? One person, two people, still hanging in there. You're making a face like, I don't really want to. I feel like I'm supposed to. No?
I'm confident of that.
You're confident in Sharon. Okay. So now we're going to move on to round 3. When this moves. So round 3, this is everything else. This is all the fun stuff. So what is a person going to add to the community? This is what you're going to look for. You know, curiosity, citizenship, passion, political philosophies, demographics, and family background. It's a whole set of things, right? I'm going to put those slides up, and you're going to learn about each of these kids, where they're from, what they want to do, what people said about them, what they say about themselves. And we're going to try to move kind of quickly. So here's Connor, raised in Long Island but attends the classical boarding school. His academic interests are philosophy and Japanese. He has one essay that takes attack with a discourse on the meaning of the word success. The topic is not very personal. It's a dry paper that reads like a term paper contrasting the cultures of the United States and Asia. Teachers call him an erudite student who, quote, often wonders aloud in class. I did this once and a dad in the front row said, that means he's a pain in the ass. I don't know if that's true, but I did think it was an interesting observation. The counselor describes Connor's writing style as clear and economical, but the rec does not offer a lot of personal insight. So that's Connor. Our kid who's interested in philosophy writes a little bit about it. Here's Jillian. Jillian attends a suburban high school where 90% attend a 4-year college. Basically, that just means it's a public school with a culture similar to a place like ISB. Academic interests are biology. She's pre-vet. She's got an essay about the grim conditions of a service trip to Indonesia. There's a flash of introspection, but the writing is clunky. Again, this is what an admissions officer wrote about her essay. So you can disagree with the admissions officer, but you didn't read the essay, they did. History teacher calls her reserved but insightful, with growing confidence and high scholarly values. And the counselor calls her somewhat shy and notes that Jillian is emerging as a powerful force with grace. I don't really know what that last comment means. Are there words that jump out at you about Jillian? Throw out some adjectives that you think describe her.
Well, he's saying clunky, but scholarly values and, you know, force with grace sort of contradict. I mean, how could she be clunky if she's, you know, exhibiting these type of values?
Yeah, that's true.
Emerging.
Emerging.
Yeah, late bloomer.
I hear quiet. That's the word that comes out at me.
She's got potential to.
Potential. I think that's actually a nice way of saying it. Like someone who's quiet, who isn't a strong presence necessarily, but who is learning to become more of a presence and has the potential to be someone of higher impact. That's kind of what I see. Which I'm not telling you that that's what you should see. right? I think we all have to view this through our own lenses and come to our own conclusions, but that's what starts to come out at me. This is Hannah. Hannah attends the California Independent School, which doesn't really exist. These are, I mean, I made these up, but like she does attend a California, there's no such thing as the California Independent School. That's my point. Her academic interests are community health and international relations. She's got a fascinating essay about her political activism during a congressional primary. She has a mature voice that reveals someone who's willing to roll up her sleeves and make things happen. Her English teacher describes her as one of the most powerful in my 30-year career, praises her first-rate mind and deep understanding of sophisticated literature. She is, quote, extraordinarily gifted, end quote. Counselor proclaims that she's going to change the world, notes her moral imperative to social activism, and calls her a passionate leader with a rational yet optimistic idealism. Okay, so before you all get swept up in the power of the recommendations, let's recall that this is the California Independent School, where the ratio of counselors to students is more like 30 to 1 instead of the 200 to 1 at the suburban high school. So, and the English teacher has 10 students in her class instead of 35. So that's not to say that these recs aren't right, or that who they're describing isn't real, but that the context of the school should matter to you. You know, clearly makes a very strong impact on highly sophisticated educators who are working at a very sophisticated school, and that has merit. But be mindful of the background. Ethan attends the Urban Magnet School. His academic interests are physics and environmental studies. He's got an essay about his passion for building cars and the need for environmentally friendly fuel, and his growing interest in organic biodiesel. It's an interesting, well-written essay. His English teacher highlights his key, wide-ranging intellect and his ability to integrate ideas from all areas of his life. Ethan's long-term goal is to work in the auto industry. Counselor says his peers were shocked that he didn't run for student council president, but Ethan wanted a less ceremonial position. You'll remember that he's the activities chair, and he won the school award for leadership as a result. That's Ethan. Physics, cars, leadership. Julie attends a sprawling public high school, like the ones in Chicago, probably not in Chicago, maybe in Chicago. Biology and Spanish. You'll recall the Spanish SAT-2 was really strong here. Personal essay is diary form regarding a service project in Costa Rica. The conversational tone is solid but not especially reflective. You'll notice this is the second service trip essay we've come across that did not impress an admissions officer. It is not an accident that I am including this lesson for you to learn. Was that clear enough? That was a little subtle, I think. It's not that you can't write good service trip essays, it's that virtually no one does. She's got a supplemental essay about how much she loves all forms of music. Teachers call her hardworking. Counselors describe her as creative and independent with a, quote, solid high school career. So that's Julie. And then Sharon. Sharon attends the Jesuit high school. Her academic interests are economics. She talks about how nice it is to grow up in a meritocratic time, and has an essay that reflects on moving out of her old, quiet apartment building before it was demolished. The essay is more emotional than intellectual. Teachers call her hardworking and diligent, someone focused on grades more than ideas. Counselor X says she recovered from a disaster when she spread herself too thin. So these are the 6 candidates. Do you have questions about any of them at this point? So let's vote, and as we vote, we'll go through and we'll talk about them. Are you ready? It's more complicated now, right? In some ways, it's interesting when you start getting to this part. In some ways, it's more complicated, and in other ways, it's more obvious. I don't know, maybe that's your experience here. So Connor, who's voting for Connor in this round? Connor drops back down to 0.
Can you flip it through these real quick?
Connor. Connor is the philosopher interested in Japanese, drier. Jillian is pre-vet, emerging, potential, maybe quiet. Hannah is the activist who's going to change the world. Ethan, cars, physics, leadership. Julie, Spanish, Costa Rica, hardworking, solid. Sharon, the meritocratic girl interested in economics who had some kind of disaster, don't really know why. And to link this back to their extracurriculars, here they are. And they're great. Here they are. So who's voting for Connor?
I'll stay with Connor. He's a guy.
2 people. 2 people voting for Connor. Slightly better than originally, much less than the last round.
That's what I'm voting for him too.
Jillian. Who's voting for Jillian? No one. You seemed to like her when we got to her the first time. And you liked her when I read her out the first time, when I told you all these things.
The word clunky gets in my...
You were the one that said, how could she be that clunky? And yet the clunkiness is still getting in your way.
Yeah. I
Do
don't
any
like
of
that
you-
word clunky.
So this is the girl who's involved in her church youth group, who does community service, who plays the violin, you know, who's writing about
Okay, violin and clunky doesn't go together.
You think so?
I mean, violin, you think of someone delicate and...
Well, the writing is clunky.
Well, yeah, but the word clunky just turns me off.
Well, what's wrong, other than that word, what's wrong with Jillian?
I think she can be a very a studious student, but a very silent leader in her own way. You know?
So there's not, I mean, you're not able to put your finger and say, here's where she screwed up. And yet, literally 0 of you are voting for her. Which is, I think, an important lesson. Hannah. Who's voting for Hannah? How many of you is that? Raise your hand high if you're voting for Hannah so we can accurately count you. 1, 2, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. 17 for Hannah. Who's voting for Ethan? It's everybody. Who's voting for Julie? 2, 3. Sharon? 1. Sticking with her all the way through. Our winners appear to be Ethan and Hannah. Do you want to know who I voted for when these kids came up in committee? I voted for Ethan and Connor.
My comment.
I'll tell you why I voted for Connor. So, I didn't mention this before, but both philosophy and Japanese are institutional priorities at Tufts. They're both very powerful programs that are underserved because what high school kid wants to major in philosophy? His essays have a dry, you know, kind of quality to them, but you know what? Good philosophy is dry. And he's a kid who's, you know, in the United States, but thinking cross-culturally about how philosophy differs as you move from place to place. I like that he's found a way to integrate his sense of philosophy and the sense of Japanese. You know, I think he's a kid that probably doesn't play by the rules everywhere else. I look at his extracurriculars, I see someone who's intellectually engaged, who's engaged in his community, who's thinking, and it shows up in his essays, but who's not getting the best grades, probably because he's bored in his classes, because the teachers aren't talking about the things that he thinks is interesting. And I like that. Like, to me, in my mind, of the 6, he seems like the one with the greatest potential to really unfold and become something very different and very strong in a university setting where he can articulate and define for himself his own interests. Does this convince any of you to jump on board and vote for him? Does it make any of you want to, like, ditch Connor? One of you would? Yes! I'm curious, for the rest of you who will not ditch Connor, or who will not ditch their, you know, your other votes for Connor, do you see what I'm describing? Like, when I articulate that, does Connor come out of the file? Like, you see what I see, you just won't vote for him anyway?
Well, if he's impacted, you wouldn't really have a choice.
Yeah. I mean, actually, that happens a lot in committee where everybody sees the same kid, you just vote differently, even though you all agree on who the person is. I think that's kind of interesting.
But often wonders allowed in class. What do you think about that?
I think he's a kid that likes to argue. I mean, he's the kid on the debate team, the kid who starts a philosophy club. He likes to talk through his ideas. And, you know, again, philosophy, you have to be able to do that. You know, eureka.
I think you selected because you have an internal priority of your school.
Yeah, but I've now told you about that, and you're members of the committee.
But it just goes to show all the committee members don't have to agree.
Yeah. And just because a kid meets an institutional priority doesn't mean they get in. But it is a bump.
Also maybe because you said in the beginning that you like to dabble in lots of things and...
Oh no, he's definitely me.
Yeah, so here's you.
He's like, that was me. I was the pain in the ass in all of my classes.
So that's the personal connection you made.
Yeah, no, I mean, the reason I can see him to articulate to you who he is because I see, like, I look at these pieces and I think, like, I know exactly who that kid is because he used to be me.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that you have to vote for him or that I have to vote for him, for that matter. But it does mean I can see him with a greater clarity than you can because I know what it's like to be that kid who's bored in class and thinking outside of it. I'm going to show you who got in. So these are the actual decisions. Ooh, isn't that fun? Because it's the Connor was waitlisted. I made the argument in the committee that I made with you, and he came 1 vote short. I was the only one to vote for him the first time around. 3 people switched. The rest did not. Waitlist. Jillian was denied. Hannah was admitted. Ethan was admitted. Julie was denied. Sharon was denied. What I love about this is you're all surprised that Sharon got denied, but none of you voted for her, except for 1 person.
I switched.
Oh, you switched, that's right, you jumped on board for Connor. None of you voted for Sharon in the end. So, you know, for the point about why are we denying kids with perfect grades and perfect scores, look at how strong Sharon is compared to Hannah. Look how strong Julie is compared to Hannah. But you know what? You voted for the right 2 kids because Hannah's going to be the one that our teachers notice in the classroom. So I want to take just kind of a brief moment and share with you some things. This is a little bit of a kind of sharp detour from what we were talking about a moment ago. But I want to share with you some things about my experience reading Thailand this year. And some of this might surprise you, some of it might startle you. It's actually not happy compared to some of the things we were just talking about. This year, Tufts had a little bit more than 30 applicants from Thailand from Thai citizenship applying to Tufts. And of those 30, or of those 30 plus, a full 25% were strongly suspected or confirmed to have submitted fraudulent materials in their applications. 25%. The vast majority of them were students who I followed up on, contacted schools, and was able to determine that the things they had said they had done in their applications were not things that had actually happened. And we denied all of them. No discussion, none of what we just did. No one got to articulate a case on their behalf. We denied them. It pains me to say that Thailand is quickly developing a reputation as being second to only China in terms of fraud. And increasingly, schools like mine are becoming extremely aware of the validity of materials for applicants who are applying. And I can tell you that for the case of at least 3 of the students who we denied, I'm sure we would have admitted them otherwise.
You might want to explain what fraud, I mean, not what the word means, but how you, what you...
They had things listed in their extracurricular activities that they had not done. They wrote essays about things they had not done, or someone else wrote essays on their behalf about things they had not done. They had fed information to their teachers so that their teachers could write about things in their recommendations that they had not done. And not just in Thailand, but Thais overseas as well. It's a big problem, and it's starting to impact on the reputations of otherwise very strong schools here. And I'm not going to name names, I'm not going to talk about agencies. You know, I understand why families will use outside agencies and outside counselors. And there is a range of counselors, some of which are very, very good and very ethical and really have your children's best interests at heart, and some of which are without ethics and without morals and will do whatever it takes to get your kids into college, which sounds like a great thing at first unless your kids get caught and denied at the schools they want to go to, which is what will start to happen.
You mean you denied all the applicants?
All the ones who I caught cheating.
Oh, you caught cheating, right?
But I caught 25% of them cheating.
Can you comment on any wariness on applications coming from high school?
I can tell you that the problem is systemic, widespread, and I think broadly distributed in the international schools here in Thailand. I don't think any school has a monopoly on the problem or a clean slate. And it's not the fault of the counselors, because I can tell you the counselors are upset about this, as I am, and as my colleagues in admissions are. There's only so much we and they can do to dissuade you from using these services, except to warn you that there's a really good chance that in the future your children will be denied admission to the schools they want to go to as a result of these things.
The flip side of that is how can student applicants be confident that their application would be considered without any wariness.
So again, I'll be honest with you. This year, every time I got suspicious, I contacted people and followed up and verified. And every time I got suspicious, my suspicions were then verified. There was, well, with one exception. There was one kid this year where I thought, is this real? And I contacted the counselor, and the counselor said this is real. Next year, I mean, that was really time-consuming, actually, to do that for a lot of applicants this year. Next year, I don't know if I'm going to send quite so many emails, and there'll be instances where I just trust my instincts and deny the students. And this is a significant problem for you as a community. And as a community, I think you need to start policing each other and holding each other accountable, because you will damage the reputation of ISB and damage your chances of your children going to the schools they want if we catch, wind of something that isn't real in an application. And some of us will do our due diligence and will contact the schools because we have good relationships with the counselors here and have good relationships with the counselors at a lot of schools. And some of us have too many applications to read and are just going to deny your children because they don't have the time.
How does that affect the other nationality of the student, except Thai nationality? How that has an impact on the other nationality student?
I mean, it depends. It's limited, I think, at this point, because I haven't found evidence of non-Thai nationals in Thailand engaging in this, but I am looking now. I mean, I didn't find anyone that fell into this group this year who was like that, a kind of an American living here, or someone who's Dutch living here, whatever. But I'm looking now for it, and when I find it, I'm going to follow up. But I don't believe all of my peers have the time to do that. I know for a fact many of them don't. I mean, if your children are applying to the UCs, for instance, where they have tens of thousands of applications to review, there's no way that those counselors are going to start emailing around every time they come across an applicant that they think is fishy. They're just going to say no, and you won't know why. And in some instances, they'll probably, I think in most instances actually, they'll probably be right. And in some instances, hopefully a very limited number of instances, they might be wrong. But the way that you deal with this issue is Thailand's got to become clean.
But how do you identify if someone is using an outside counselor?
I don't care if you're using an outside counselor.
No, but I mean, how do you know it's not a legitimate ISD?
This year I emailed. This year I contacted the counselors at the schools.
But like you said, if you have questions, it might be legitimate. You may not bother or email as much.
Yeah, I mean,
so you could be ruling out kids that are credible.
Yeah.
And not
Absolutely.
So I mean, isn't that sort of?
I have an obligation to my faculty to make sure that the students that we admit are real. And I have enough applicants that I'm really strongly in favor of, that I'm pushing to be admits in committee, that I'm confident in, that I don't need to push kids who aren't. And, part of me feels like I should justify it to you, and I should say, yeah, I know, I should do more. And part of me wants you to know what we're doing, whether you like it or not. My hope is that this doesn't dissuade your children from applying to Tufts. What I can tell you is that if they do apply to Tufts, they're going to get a lot of scrutiny. And what that means is that we are really confident that the students we have are who they say they are, and that that's who their peer group is going to be.
Daniel, question. Actually, I have 2 questions. Now, if Tufts is having a problem with this, it's probably, you're going to share your information with other universities. That's number 1.
Yeah.
Number 2 is once a kid gets in, you say you made a mistake and admit it, you're going to soon find out that he or she cannot write an essay.
No, actually, that's why I say that 3 of the candidates I found cheating this year would have been students who would have been admitted if they had just done it themselves.
You wouldn't have been admitted?
No, they would have. The 3 of the candidates, 3 specific people I'm thinking of this year, who we would have taken. We would have admitted them.
But what about the other side of the coin? You take in and you made a mistake.
Oh, because we have we still have the grades here,
you still
right?
file them?
Like it's not. If we can prove that what they submitted in their application isn't who they submitted them, who they said that they were going to be, we'll withdraw the offer of admission.
Oh, but no, after admission.
We would kick them out. I mean, when the enrollment form that students sign, they have to agree that what they sent in their application is real, or they can be active in harm. I mean, that's infrequent that would happen. I actually don't know of any instances where that has happened and a student's been kicked out, but it could.
Or they will eventually leave because they can't keep up the grades.
That's not so much the issue for us, because even when the students are fraudulent, they're still capable. the issue isn't that we're taking kids who we shouldn't have taken. The issue is that we can't take kids that we might have taken otherwise because we're finding things in their applications, right? Like, they're still strong students. We're just no longer in a position to admit them.
This favors honest kids. That's
Yeah.
what I'm trying to say.
And so, you know, your children should be able to articulate themselves honestly and to do so with confidence and to describe their achievements and to be proud of themselves, but they need to do that in a way where what they say they did is actually what they've done, or they're going to start getting denied.
Is it more a problem of people making false claims, or is it people doing the application for them?
Well, the people who do
or
the
is it a
application,
combination?
it's both. Yeah, it's both.
I have a question on the scattergram, because what you're saying is a low GPA kid, the top one, I forget the name, getting old. You know, all these extracurricular activities and the talents and everything came in to pull that kid into the system. But, you know, I mean, we are under the impression that the first cutoff is academics, because my mind kept on going back to the GPA and the SAT. I was like trying to, you know, I mean, how can you take a kid like, was it Hannah?
Yeah.
That you, I mean, you need an advocate on the committee. And it's sort of a soft issue.
Yeah.
It's not hard facts. Numbers are stronger than words.
Right. That's exactly right.
So what chance does a kid who has a 3.07 have, you know, a great university like yours? It's
a limited chance.
It's luck, right?
It's not luck, because the reasons on, so it's luck on your side, from your perspective. It's very deliberate on our end. Like, that's part of why I wanted to show this to you. Like, when you were voting, you weren't voting accidentally. You didn't like flip a coin, am I going to vote for this one or not? You made a really deliberate, conscious choice. And that deliberate, conscious choice resulted in a decision. Now, for the 6 kids that got in or didn't get in, they'll look at those decisions and it'll seem arbitrary from their perspective, even though it was very deliberate on yours. So, my hope is what you take out of this is, to be competitive, you have to have the right numbers, and then to get in, you've got to have more than the numbers. And that's what I want you to take out, if you could boil it down to one sentence. Thanks so much for coming. I hope this was helpful. I hope it was interesting. I hope you tell your kids to apply to Tufts.
Bye.